Hey, this is Boaz. Thanks for showing up. Please visit the Fools and Sages podcast at foolsandsagespodcast.com. There are no spaces and it's all spelled out. You can find show notes, references, bios, merch, and other cool features. Contact us if you have feedback or a question, if you want to appear on the show, or if you want either or both of us to be a guest on your podcast. You can listen and subscribe on Spotify, YouTube, Rumble, Apple Podcasts, iHeart Podcasts, and anywhere else great podcasts are found. And follow us on X and Instagram. Support us on Patreon. The Patreon link's also in our website. And thank you. Enjoy the show. Good morning, Brian.
Good morning. How are you doing?
I'm well, thank you. I've got a little bit of a stuffy nose, so hopefully that doesn't affect our conversation too much today, but I feel good.
Good to hear. I'm glad you're on the upswing.
Yeah. How are you?
I'm doing good. I got my fire going here. So yeah. Looking
It's the
good.
little things, right?
Oh boy, I got my beverage and
So we've had a few listeners ask us for more information about what we mean by ceremonies, which has come up in several of the podcast episodes we've done so far. And so we thought today we would try to explain maybe our relationship to the ayahuasca tradition, what our experience has been, what a ceremony is like, why it matters, and also maybe we'll get into some of what is being done with psychoactives today and some concerns, honestly, that I have at least, or maybe we share about that.
for sure.
So maybe to get us started, I got into ceremonies through you. So an origin story, I think starts more with you. So if you want to kick it off with, how did you get into that?
Yeah.
And yeah.
Well, let's see. It was quite a while ago. And as some folks know, I've been a martial artist from the age of 12, 13, something like that. And I had gotten an injury on one of my feet. And this injury, it was not exactly a normal injury. And it seemed to, I found out later that one of my metatarsals, and those are the bones like in your hand, the bones that you can see moving on the back of your hand, those are metacarpals. And the same things for the toes are called metatarsals. So it turns out I had a broken metatarsal, but more significantly, it seemed to have an effect on my gallbladder meridian, which ran right through there, because I started to get stuff with the liver and the gallbladder, and I kind of got sick, and I wasn't really, I'd been doing, martial arts my whole life. I was pretty vital. I was living a very active life. So it was very unusual that my vitality would be hit by something like this. And so I went to an acupuncturist in our town, and he's something that maybe some of the listeners know. I'm not going to mention his name because we haven't gotten permission from him to mention that all. But he did a treatment for me, an acupuncture treatment, and he saw what was going on. We discussed it, and he said, there's this other medicine that might help, but it's kind of a ceremonial thing. And I work with these people from down in South America. And so maybe you should try this and see, we should see if that'll help. And that was my first introduction to purga. They call it ayahuasca is the name of it. Now, aya means dead, and huasca means vine. And this is, I believe, in Quechua, which is the lingua franca of the Native Americans in South America. So, and by lingua franca, I mean that's the language that becomes the connecting language. You'll speak your own tribe's language, but you speak Quechua to speak with all the other tribes. And so ayahuasca, it has been, they say it's like a 10,000-year-old tradition, that it goes back to prehistory. Um, there's a number of tribes in the Amazon that do some form of ceremonies with it. Um, and the Spanish uh, came down into that area, and so they were the first people of the first world, non-tribal people to kind of encounter this. And the acupuncturist that I went to, who was I guess he was born in Argentina, so he could speak Spanish very well, and he had a healing background. But he actually had read some books, and these books we'll put in the show notes because they're just amazing, amazing books. Uh, and one of them is called Wizards of the Upper Amazon, and the second one is called Rio Tigre and Beyond. And these books are by a man named Bruce Lamb, and they are about a gentleman named Manuel Cordoba. And Manuel Cordoba was a boy, like a camp boy in the rubber camps. So if people don't know, rubber is not just made out of completely out of test tubes, although maybe now it is. But the old days, it was made from rubber trees, and rubber trees were collected by scarring the plant or the rubber rather. They call gaucho, I think, and they would scar the plant and pull the sap out and make it into these big balls, and that's what they would sell to the companies that then would make them into everything you make rubber out of, or out of rubber. So, these 2 books are, to not tell them, all the details, they're just wonderful, wonderful books. Uh, he's basically our hero. Manuel Cordoba is basically the camp boy, and the men go out to scout a stand of rubber trees in the evening, and they don't come back. And he suspects, well, in the jungle, they just went up in a tree and chilled for the night because you just don't go traipsing around in the Amazon at night. And he knew that. But then he gets up in the morning, they're still not back. He goes down to wash his face in the river. And as he's looks up, sees he's surrounded by a bunch of Amahuaca Indians, spear point, arrow point, and they capture him. They take any of the good stuff, and they basically bring him 2-3 days run through the jungle farther back than any non-tribal people had ever been. And that's the beginning of his story where he learns the way of the ayahuasqueros, the shaman of the Amahuaca. And it's just unlike anything else in the world. I can't recommend it highly enough. It's just what a story. And so this friend of ours, this acupuncturist I went to, he talked to Bruce Lamb, who wrote those books. And he ended up going down to South America and getting a connection with some of the folks down there that do those traditions. And that was how we got exposed to it. In Spanish, they call it La Maravilla del Mundo, the marvel of the world. And it surely is that. It surely is that. But so that's a kind of a foundation, a beginning story, of what this is all about. Now, people know about it and it's more common. People have heard about it, but this was actually, back, I don't know, 20-25 years ago, something like that, right?
So your first experience of it was in Peru. You didn't do any ceremonies here. You went straight to Peru and got the download there.
Well, no, it was actually here.
Oh, okay.
I did do it here for quite a while. I was super poor in those days, had kids to feed, and just zooming off to Peru was not something that I could afford to do. Later, I was able to do it, and that I think we spoke about that when I finally made it down there, in some of the earlier episodes. Um, but the things that had gone on with me, I was pretty buggered up in the beginning, and then some of those first ceremonies that I did also had Toe in them, which is Datora, and this is something that this is one of the cautions that we have is that we only did this stuff with people that were well trained in how to do it. This was not random psychotourism. And these plant medicines are super powerful, and in the wrong hands they can be pretty dangerous. um, so for example, Now ayahuasca is quite popular. People know the name at least, but a lot of people don't realize that it can have some pretty severe interactions with other pharmaceutical drugs and things. So it's definitely not something to freelance. So that it's good to get that out up front. Um, you know, I think our tradition, and we can talk about this because this is the kind of the chapter that we're in, but it didn't just fall out of the sky. It's the logical result of a process of trying to understand things that goes all the way back to Socrates. And we'll be able to get into that in future episodes, if not right away here. So it's significant in what it represents. I think what one of the big impacts of it is that we have this idea that tribal people that were primitive were like super ignorant and everything was a superstition and they had no idea of how things work. And I think we're coming to understand that was just an expression of hubris more than anything else, and that their intelligence was just focused in different ways. So this is some of the things we're starting to understand now.
Maybe before we get into how ayahuasca or plant medicine and shamanism might fit in to a modern worldview, is there more we might want to share about what the experience is like?
Absolutely, yeah,
And you had started with, something going on with your foot and having some liver and gallbladder implications and a
yeah.
loss of vitality. How did that develop?
Well, it was an interesting thing there, and I have to admit, I wasn't going in looking for shamanism. I was looking to get my foot, my situation fixed, and somebody who had some skills said, "Hey, you ought to check this out." And so that's how I got there. And what got my attention, let's say this. Okay, so I think my first one of my first or second ceremonies had a lot of Toei in it. And so, w I mentioned that one of the names for ayahuasca is purga, and purga means the purge, right? So you can do, especially at the beginning before you've kind of accustomed yourself to it, you can end up doing quite a bit of regurgitation. And so I cleaned out everything in my stomach. I was on all fours. I was, uh, I was trying not to vomit all over my hair and trying to hit the bowl, which, I was kind of on all fours. And so the bowl, because, you're equipped with bowls. And maybe I should start from the beginning here. So for someone who's never done this, where you come into it, you're in a room, people are on the floor. The curandero usually sits facing the east. Ideally, there would be a door facing the east also. People are sitting, usually all the men are on one side, all the women are on the other side. The curandero may have different paraphernalia that he has in front of him. They will usually use tobacco. There are other shamanic devices like a shakapa, which is a kind of a rattle, or uh, agua florida, which is a flower water. It's like a perfume water. And so so basically the curandero, he may explain some things, he may give you a little preamble. Uh, I remember the maestro that we worked with down in South America. He would often say that, this is an opportunity to look at your life, to see what is good and to see what's not good, and to choose what's good. And so, he kind of explains this, and then he'll okay, one of the things that we do with tobacco in ceremonies is tobacco has a sort of a special role because we can take it into ourselves and we can mix it, we can put our impression upon it, our intent, and then we can blow it out. And now that intent, that our energy that is mixed with the tobacco is carried out with the tobacco. So we call, this is usually blowing is to soplar in Spanish. So we call a soplada, right? Is when you blow on something. So if a curandero is going to use a cup and he's going to pour porga into the cup to serve you, he's going to first blow some tobacco into that cup, and he's going to have blown some tobacco into that porga, and he's going to maybe have sung a little song, a little icaro, which is a special song, and special. Is there's an asterisk there. Special means that it was learned in ceremony. It's an expression of something that was met in ceremonies, you may say, or it's a way that the curandero or the shaman, the brujo has learned to as a phone number to get help from certain energies. Some of these icaros are about plants, some are about animals, some are about different things, some call other curanderos. Uh, some are for calling people, right? So these icaros are not just like normal songs; they're magical songs, and the assortment of icaros that a curandero or a brujo has are kind of like his golf clubs I've mentioned before, and so they'll do different things slightly, and they have different specialties, and so not everybody like there were golf clubs in my teacher's bags that I never learned how to use and I never got into my bag. But there were some that kind of revealed themselves to me that I came to rely on and I used in a different way than the people that I learned the songs from. So but there's something that goes on there. And these songs, it's like they span the conscious and the unconscious. And we've talked or the left brain and the right brain. We've talked about the reasonable semantic world and then this collective unconscious place, and it's almost like these songs, maybe in part because they are songs, kind of can communicate across there. They're also, remember we mentioned about breath. Breath isn't, when I go to sleep, I still keep breathing, but I can hold my breath when I'm awake, right? So it sort of also bridges that conscious unconscious. Songs, and particularly shamanic songs, because of the way they employ the breath, sort of borrow some of that capacity to move between these spheres, to transcend one sphere into the other, which is a big theme, okay, in philosophy as well. So basically, everybody gets their medicine, everything's handed out. The room has usually been cleared with tobacco also. Uh, and then the lights go out, and the shaman begins to call. And when he calls, calling is like the way it was explained to me, it's like the way the animals call to their babies in the jungle. So you hear bird sounds and you hear flapping of wings and you hear, little ticking sounds and all the things that you might hear in the jungle if you were just to sit out in the jungle at night. All the different creatures that use sound to communicate because it's dark now, right? So and then out of that, usually there'll be a rhythm that sort of comes under the breath. So it might be just a and maybe you can start to hear a little song in there or a little melody. But the curandero is at this point, he's like now some maestros, they start always with the same song. But the general process is that something is coming through and that it is psychically aware of the mix of things that are in the room, and it's aware of the intent of the curandero or the brujo, and so it starts to work. I don't know how to say it. Do you have anything to explain about that? I mean, now we're getting into the stuff that we can't exactly translate, but, something comes up and the song has done some sort of triage maybe, like it knows what's the most important thing that needs to be dealt with first, and the club for that is the club that jumps out of the golf bag, and that's the work that you do. I mean, how would you explain that?
Yeah, I really liked how you put it, that something is coming in that is aware of the energy in the room, that is aware of the intent of the curandero. Um, in the training I had outside of working with you, you usually started with the same song and then went in any number of directions. The person I worked with the most, his first three songs were almost always the same.
Chakra Jawakri.
Yeah, Chakri Jawakra, Nina Caspi, and Los Santitos.
Okay. Okay.
And there are pros and cons to that. And when I have run ceremonies, I've tried it both ways and still experience pros and cons. Because having your first three songs dialed up means you're going to get pretty far out into the middle of the lake before the script might change, and sometimes in disruptive ways, right? On the other hand,
Especially with Los Santitos.
yeah,
Now, I should mention, just as a little footnote, you mentioned 3 songs, Chakri Jawakri, uh,
Nina Caspi.
Nina Caspi, which is about the fire bush, right? Nina Caspi, I must have heard it hundreds of times. It never took for me. It never became a tool, but it will show up at times. Like I was just
I've
walking,
heard you sing it, and you've sung it to me.
but
And
I mean, I never really had it. Like I
yeah,
never grasped it. But I have parts of the lines that would
there
come,
are version after version after version of Nina Caspi coming from Solontejo Lozano,
Uh-huh.
and I've got I think six or seven
Oh, okay.
that, and they work differently. And
I
so
bet you. Yeah.
while the teacher I worked with the most, he used the same version of Nina Caspi most of the time. When I lead ceremonies, it might be any number of Nina Caspis that show up
Oh, okay.
as number
Uh-huh.
two. But the way those three songs work, or my association with it, is Chakri Jawakra is kind of setting the table. We have a farm, we have a bowl, we have a pipe, we have a child. You know, it's like here's what we have, here's who we are. And
Right.
then Nina Caspi calls in a really wide variety of plants and animals and other things like gasoline, volcano,
Right,
um,
right.
magnet, different
Silver,
colors.
gold.
Yeah, right. Precious metals, exactly. And then Los Santitos is calling in the saints, which is interesting because that's not coming out of the jungle tradition. That's coming out of the mestizo tradition, like the urban curanderos in like Iquitos.
Exactly. And what it shows though is we spoke about this in one other episode about this idea of an egregore, like a psychic package that people through tradition and through generations sort of fill up as a battery. And then certain uh, people with the technology can tap into those batteries. And so for the curanderos that we both worked with, it didn't matter whether it was of the Virgin Mary or one of the saints or a big snake or gasoline. If it came and did the work, then that's what was important. Because all of those things, one might say, are just different aspects of the creator. Right. So,
Yeah. So I think in those first moments of a ceremony, the lights are out. There's usually a sense of tension, and the energy of the Icaro is coming in through the curandero into the room.
as the medicine is coming on, usually I think of this beginning as it can just get very heavy very fast. It can get very, we think about it like the roller coaster. And this is the part where that tension is what you're referring to, is like that roller coaster going up. And then usually I guess that hasn't always been true, but often the heaviest parts are at the beginning. The darkest parts where you really need to scrap it out is often at the beginning.
So two things there. One, just a quick mention that the Shipibo Indians, interestingly, will drink their purga and then go to sleep. And then the really heavy stuff wakes them up, and then they're in it.
Oh,
Which so they don't
interesting.
do
Yeah.
this whole setting the table thing, right? So that's interesting. But then I thought we've used the word heavy and dark before,
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And I don't know if that if we don't have some assumptions about people knowing what we might mean by that.
Right.
Can we
Right.
describe that, do you think? Or explain it?
Um, well, if people have ever had bad hallucinogenic experiences, that's typically what we would what we would refer to as heavy or dark.
So that could show up as paranoia or fear.
It can
Um,
show up as scary stuff. It can show up, I think I mentioned getting Polaroid snapshots of mutilated body parts and the things trying to go boo. And it can show up as an internal dialogue about yourself and about, how your life looks, or, it really depends on what's going on. People can get so buggered up that it's just a straight up bad trip.
you could find yourself hating somebody else in the room for no apparent reason.
There can be very heavy emotions. Yep. Yep.
Yeah. Um, and and I think also, that heaviness can be physical,
Mhm.
where
Very
we
much so.
we had energy, plenty of energy 10 minutes ago, 15 minutes ago, and it's gone, right? We feel sapped, we feel
I've spent
drained.
hours on all fours, like elbows and knees, going, "Oh my god, how is this how did this get this thick?" And I've had that stuff on me. The way this is done traditionally is you have the maestro who's driving the bus, and then he's usually got an apprentice, usually at least one apprentice. And if there's one apprentice, then that apprentice position is sort of like an easy target for the negative stuff, because the curandero is like the guy holding the end of the fire hose. So there's a lot of juice coming out of him. So it seems like a lot of stuff comes and rat packs the apprentice. And I mean, we used to call that riding in the garbage truck because everything came. And I can remember more than once getting looked at by whoever was running the ceremony, like they'll finish up the hard stuff and look at me and go, "Oh, okay, let's clean you up." And then miraculously, a soplata or, whatever, and then whatever's accumulated on you. And I know this sounds very bizarre and very superstitious, but this is this is definitely consensually experienced.
I
Okay.
I was gonna go there exactly. So we've introduced a mental model now that is probably very unfamiliar. Like, by
Yeah.
what exactly are we getting rat packed, right? And I think there are various ways of talking about this that are more or less, easily integrated into, let's say, a first world perspective or a Western, rational perspective. So one of the things that, my teacher would say at the beginning of a ceremony frequently is that on the psychic plane there are parasites, and they show up as thought forms that aren't helpful, and those manifest as behaviors that aren't helpful. And so you can take the idea of parasite as literal or metaphoric, and the model works the same. And I find that helpful when explaining to folks. Like, you don't have to believe in demonios, you don't have to believe in, um, psychic vampirism and things like that. But you can be aware of the thought forms that exist in your psyche, or in the collective psyche, that don't further. And the medicine will make those very apparent.
Yeah. And I think there's almost like a taxonomy to it. Like there's mosquitoes out there and there's tigers and other things. And, and because I can remember the experience of very early on seeing some stuff and getting kind of a bit freaked out by it. But I didn't have any sea legs at that time. And then, I don't know, maybe 10 years later or something, somehow I see this and recognize it as this thing that punked on me. And I was like getting punked on by a chipmunk or something, because my grasp had expanded so much, and I knew it didn't like that can't affect me, and so and the ones that show up as thought forms are kind of obvious, once you get to see how that works, but there's even subtler ones, and, that's why we talk about this process of trying to get the spatula in between the person and whatever has glommed on them, and you can literally see that a lot of times people have this idea that, okay, this is like magic and you're gonna do it once and he's gonna blow a puff of tobacco at you, and now everything that's ever been wrong is going to get fixed. And it's like, no, 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 no. This. Yes, these people are wizards, but yes, we're also still in reality here. So yes, there are miraculous things that happen, but they're worked for, and they're often worked for over time. So while I have seen spontaneous transmission of or a remission of things, I've also seen more the rule that people need to work with to come to understand their personal demons and then learn the tools to deal with those demons and then how to wield them correctly into the future. And I have, and I've talked with people along this path, and some people that were severely OCD, and it seemed to uh, work as good as any therapies that I've seen in the first world, let's put it that way, as far as their life continuing, you know?
Yeah, I think my first, I don't know, 50 ceremonies or so were all kind of getting to a place where I could sit up straight. And it was basically dealing with the same stuff every time. And every time I'd be like, oh my God, I can't believe I'm still dealing with this stuff.
Mhm.
And and frequently, just to give our listeners a little perspective on what I mean by stuff, frequently I would be having visuals of Nazi atrocities, and in particular, they had this vibe of methamphetamine sped up, nightmarish material, and so I would get usually into Los Santitos, sometimes not even that far. So let's say between 45 minutes and an hour and a half into the ceremony. And I would feel less and less energy. I'd be having these visuals. I'd feel afraid. I'd feel disconnected from the other people in the room. I'd be trying to keep singing, but eventually I'd be on all fours, or even curled up, still on all fours, but with my forehead even on the floor, in like a vertical fetal position, and usually throwing up. And I think an experience people frequently have, and not always, is that when they throw up, first of all, then they feel better. But often during the throwing up, there can be an awareness of what it is that one is throwing up. And that's a kind of a bizarre experience the first few times
Very
it
bizarre
happens.
experience, yeah.
And it can have you talked earlier about connecting the left brain and right brain and the conscious and unconscious, but another thing that's getting connected up here is the physical with the emotional with the psychic. And that might be the biggest miracle of them all, because we think of therapeutic modalities as really being all up here. And you've mentioned Reiki and therapy and things like that that break that pattern. But you go to a psychoanalyst or whatever and lay on the couch and you're talking about your thoughts and your feelings like they're all up here. But Purga connects up the physical body with the mind in your perception in a way that when you throw up, you might physically feel where some trauma is located in your body, what thought forms are associated with it, what feelings are associated with it, and you dump it in the bowl, and this whole thing just kind of moves and gives you an opportunity to then differentiate from it, where previously you might have very much experienced it as part of yourself. So when you say the shaman would turn to you and say, "Oh, we got to get you cleaned up now." My model for that is cleaned up means differentiating you or helping you differentiate from what is you and what is not you.
Mhm. Right,
Yeah.
exactly, yeah, and I mean, it's really interesting the places that you go in sorting that out in these spaces, um, and the different things that you can connect to.
What do you mean by places you go? What does that mean?
Well, you can go a lot of different places, let's put it that way. What I was meaning then was particularly about understanding who you are and understanding the part of you that that was created from the purest thoughts of the creator. Let's put it that way. This idealized version, if you will. Um, that that bit of divinity that is in every living thing that is different than all the things that obscure that and fight against it. Um, so, and that's this idea of purging, getting out all those things that aren't furthering, and 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 also recovering from damage that's been accumulated. That's sort of, the model might be that there's something that's actually using that energy because it's glommed onto you, and that when that we remove that thing in the Western white ceremonial tradition, they may call that a larva. They've given you a association. And that's one of the uses of the magical sword in the white ceremonial tradition, just as a association. Um, but uh, but yeah, there's you can go a lot of different places, and but I think it takes you a while. Like you have to get all the stuff off the windshield before any of the places you'll be able to see. Until then, you'll just be seeing stuff on the windshield, if that makes any sense. So, the places that I went after I kind of had gotten it, had my like, I think I was probably 60 or 70 ceremonies in, and, these took places over a couple decades, um, before I had this, "Oh, this is what's going on," kind of thing. And not that that was my last one of those, but, uh but yeah, there's a whole thing here, and when you start working with different people, you start to see, that there is a whole world here, and, some of these are just, one of the things that I just can't stand, honestly, is to listening to people's mushroom trip stories. So, I don't wanna go in that direction, but there are different places that carry different content, and then it gets really interesting when it gets sort of transpersonal. So, when you start working with other people, and how does the medicine work with you when you're learning to try to bridge to another person, right? When you're sitting in a place where you're trying to literally be compassionate, you're literally trying to sort of tune in on the suffering that is working with this person and lighten that suffering a little bit, or open up pathway for it to move, or reinforce the vision of the person underneath the things that have glommed on, like, there's a number of different things, but you do realize that there's a lot of different dimensions than just our intellectual dimensions of things. Uh, yeah, I mean, and then the different ways to work with that, that's the wonderful world of shamanic, expression. It's a Maravilla del Mundo, yeah.
Maybe just to finish out the tactical stuff.
Mhm.
Um,
Oh, I should let me finish my first story here, because this kind of tells, yeah, and it is tactical. So, so I go to the ceremony, and it's got Toei in it, and I'm puking, trying not to throw up all over my hair, get my hair in the bowl. And meanwhile, because of the Toei, what they would say is that Toei helps you fly. Well, I was more puddled than flying, but in the terms of it can make your body go away, yeah. And I remember we were in a house that had shag carpeting. It tells you this was a while ago. And I remember rubbing my forearms on the carpet so that I could get a sensation so that I could feel back through and drive my arms, if that makes sense. And I tried to g it was dark, the lights are out. I went off to go to the bathroom at one point, and we're talking about, yeah, probably across the living room. It wasn't a huge house. Uh, Took me like, I don't know, half an hour to get there. I got lost a couple times, and most of it was on all fours, right? Getting in the dark to get to the bathroom. Uh, but so then the real interesting one was I told you I'd had that issue with my foot, and that sort of showed up as moving through my liver, gallbladder, which was the meridian that it was on. So this curandero, he takes out what they call a sucking stone. This is another tactical device for a shaman. And basically, it's a shell that has become fossilized. And some of them, the shell will be a little bit opened. And if it's opened enough, you can stick a cigarette in there. And so you can feed the shell with tobacco. And the way it was explained to me is this shell was laid up through a living creature. So it has a fundamentally organic structure or matrix, but it's been filled in with stone now. And that organic matrix can fool some of these things that have glommed on, these larvae, if you will, and they with the medicine and the icaros, the patient's body is in a very uncomfortable place now for this energetic leech to live. And here is this other thing with an organic matrix. So it thinks, oh, there's a better place. And it goes into there and then it's locked in stone. That's the conception. Great, whatever. I was still a basically normal person as far as worldview was concerned. So he takes this shell and he puts it on the stone, puts it on my foot where the original injury occurred. And this is relatively early in the ceremony, so it was still a little bit on the intense side. But all of a sudden, I feel like I am super seasick. I'm shaking like when you have the flu and you're really intensely feverish. I I I ask them, "Can I lay down?" And they're like, "Yeah, go ahead, lay down." He traces this stone up my leg, and when he parks it over my liver gallbladder, that's when it really gets intense. And so they sing for, I don't know, 20 minutes, 25 minutes. The stone is over my liver the whole time. Uh, Finally, they finish. He says to his helper, "Good job." They pull the stone off, and like that, I'm stopped feeling hot and cold. I stop vibrating. I stop going through this intense thing, and I'm more or less normal again. Then the next day, whatever I had been feeling with my leg and my stagnation in the liver, gallbladder, all that felt tremendously improved. It wasn't gone until I went finally down to South America, and I think I mentioned that in the other ceremony about kind of like a roto-rooter snake that worked up and down that meridian into that point. Uh, but so at this point now I'm like, okay, whatever that just was, it's like this is the only thing that's gotten any traction on what's going on with my leg and so I'm a believer in so much as my body has responded to this. And that was what induced me to keep pursuing it. And then, of course, whole other dimensions opened up after that. But that's what brought me to it, was very pragmatic. I wasn't looking for anything really in the psycho or intellectual realm. I was working on my foot, was where it showed up. And so, yeah, interesting in that respect.
And did you get a hit on what it was? You said whatever that was, but
With the foot,
yeah.
well, I did. And the final part. came down to, when I did get down to Peru, and with, the guy that we both worked with, his teacher was the one in Peru that I worked with, and he looked at a picture of the person that I had this experience with, and then he did a kind of a diagnosis from that, and I don't want anybody to be able to figure out who that is, so I'm not gonna say exactly what
Yeah.
his diagnosis was, but I'm trusting and hoping that he's got that thing looked at. Let's put it that way.
So, but I think what I was angling for is, I guess, my interpretation, and this goes back to the mental model I shared earlier, where you can take the parasite as metaphorical or not.
Right.
But that there had been a transmission, energetically to
Something
you.
was riding him around and using him as a vehicle, yeah,
Yeah. Um,
basically.
yeah. And by injuring you, you picked up some of what was riding him around.
Uh, in a certain respect. I don't f it didn't show up the same way. I wasn't quite the welcome host that he was. And as I understood it, he was really young when this thing jumped on him. And it was a big, super traumatic event that it was associated with. And so I don't really feel like I was kind of in danger of it cloning itself onto me the same way. I think it was just the intent of this thing was to cause wreckage. And so anything that it could get a whack on, it was gonna cause wreckage with. And that's why I say I trust that he got that thing looked at. And, I may have some cause to believe that he did. So, but, as to our conversation episodes ago, about lotuses growing out of the mud or about translating suffering to higher ends or being ennobled by it. This is a great example of that because I paid a price. I definitely took a hit, but in doing that, it unfolded this whole other dimension of reality for me that actually translated to a whole aspect of myself being able to manifest in a way that I couldn't have. So, what we should all be so lucky with such injuries.
Good luck, bad luck, who knows? Yeah.
Exactly, exactly.
So so just to put a cap on what is a ceremony like, I think a couple of things come to mind. One is this lights out shaman singing experience lasts a long time. I let's say 8 hours is typical, something like that.
To dawn, usually from sundown to dawn, something like that, yeah.
Depending on the time of year, yeah. But in in my experience, there's kind of a micro macro of the ceremony having phases, um, those being cleaning up, getting rid of negativity, and then introducing good stuff.
Yeah,
Um,
that's a general model, yeah, if you
yeah,
get there.
yeah. Well, I mean,
And usually you do if you're
in my experience, you do everything in your power to get there. Like that's a bottom line, kind of. Yeah,
yeah, yeah, and borrow some other powers if you need to get there.
yeah. And what I mean by micro and macro is that there's a refrain in a lot of the songs I learned, where you're calling something in, a plant or an animal or a person, whatever. Um, but then you're asking them usually to do three things. One is clean up, two is get rid of negativity, three is protect. And so you go through the ceremony with that refrain kind of ongoing. But then you also get what I associate with kind of hard work songs earlier in the ceremony and lighter, more um,
Mhm.
songs maybe that bring people together, that might be easier for other
Yeah,
people to
yeah,
sing along with, that are
yeah,
that are about flowers and nice
Mhm. Yep.
smells and beautiful places and things like that, and less about
Sure.
kind of the helper tools that you're
Sure.
using at the
It's
beginning.
like the some of the Icaros are definitely to win, contests of will with the negativity, and these are the songs that seem like rowing the boat, that, like, we're going against a current, but we're not stopping it, we're rowing the boat. In other songs, my model has always been you go you as a shaman, you claim your space, and all these people are in your space now, so they're all sort of under that umbrella
Yeah,
that anything it and then the first song is really like anything that's negative that wants to say different, come out here now and we're gonna go mano a mano. And I'm gonna drive you from my space if you're anything other than positivity and light. And and that's the line in the sand right there.
yep,
And that's, soy sabio, soy brujo, like boom, I'm declaring this my turf.
yeah.
And then when all those things, especially if you get the big ones out, there's a space that's left. And the common thought is that if you just leave that space, it's going to be there for something else to jump in. And so you want to fill that space up with all the positive stuff so that there isn't that space, is like packing the wound, so that there isn't a place for reinfection. And then protection is maybe the whole final thing, and that can reach out, be around the person, right? Not just specifically to that case. And yeah, and different shaman at different stages of their ascent and career can do different stuff based on, I mean, they got different chops. And the stuff that Soloncito could do, easily, you're not going to be even thinking about in the first 20 years of you're doing any of this stuff, like that. And so there is definitely, the people that want to say, oh, this is all superstition. It's like there's just no like I mean, it's like saying deep sea fishing is superstition because you can't see the fish till the fisherman catches them, and then when he eats them, they're gone. So there's no such thing. Like this is the misapprehension of the first world and the hubris of the first world to think that if they can't understand it, then it must not be a real thing.
Well, I think, um,
And some integral theory helps us here too.
yeah, yeah, that's where I was going.
Yeah,
It's not, it is superstition, but it's not just superstition. Meaning that it's a subjective experience that can't be replicated in any predictable way. But it does have a collective component, and there are plenty of
sure.
ceremonies after which I've looked over to my friend on the other side of the maestro and said, "Did you, what just happened for you? And did you see that?" And there's that, and then there's during the ceremony itself. It's very very possible, especially once we've been through a number of them, to just have shared mind.
Uh-huh.
With the Ikado being the connector. So the maestro singing and me being word for word with him for hour after hour after hour. There's no script. It's
There's
not
no
like
script.
this is the way the songs have gone every time. No. And even going
Never
from
the
one
same
song to
twice.
another without missing a beat. And so
Yep.
there's like a you have that experience enough. You're like, okay, there's obviously some
Well, and
collective.
and and a big one also is in the early parts, there will be palpable resistance. And more often than not, at some point, it just breaks. And all of a sudden, the room is clear. And in that instant, more than once, I've had whoever I was, riding with, either a shotgun or helper, look right and we go like that.
Yeah,
Like everybody knows, boom, that we just planted the flag on that peak and now we can ski down the backside. And
yeah.
and no, and there's
That's such a
definitely,
beautiful moment.
and one of the first things that they wanted to call this, which is all very curious, and maybe it's just I should put on my tinfoil hat, but it seems at one point they were calling the active compound in here telepathine, and then at some point they changed the name to harmaline. Now, being somewhat of a philologist myself, I can't help but notice that it's like, uh, don't look here. you know. Now, again, that being said, this is not a something for beginners. You have to be judicious in how you learn these things. Um, I think it's like any idiot can learn how to drive a car, but if you didn't know which buttons to push or how to work the pedals, you would crash immediately. And there's certain similarities in this to that
Yeah.
as well. Just to balance each thought there.
Well, so that might be a good segue. I feel like we've given some introduction to what ceremonies are like, and I imagine we'll come back to it and keep kind of painting in.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
but but I'm really concerned about the mainstreaming of plant medicine. Not
Right.
because I don't want people to have the experience we're talking about. I think the more the merrier. But there are two
Absolutely.
versions of it that I think are actually becoming predominant, that I'm concerned about and curious to hear your thoughts. One is, go down to Peru, do a few ceremonies, um, have some mind blowing experience, and go back to life. Um, and that's not bad, but it might be missing some of the important stuff.
Right.
The other
Yep.
one is, and this one is more pernicious, I think, using psilocybin or ayahuasca, DMT, or synthetics like MDMA or whatever as a therapeutic without having all of the context that we've been talking about
Right.
relating to how things work on the psychic plane.
Right. That's a hyper materialist worldview, I think.
Materialist, rationalist, etc. And we're
Yep.
talking about them rationalizing what we were just saying is a fundamentally irrational experience, which doesn't make it untrue. So
Well, and the big thing is that there's a learning curve to these things, and we have this idea that says that, "Oh, it's in the compound, it's in the pharmaceutical. We're just gonna" and I've heard this, "Oh, we're just gonna take out the active ingredient and make it into a nice pill so you don't have to throw up, and then you'll just float into spirituality." It's like, well, guess what? You don't get to go to this place if you don't throw up because you got to get some of this stuff out. It's like there is no bourgeoisie way to do things that require extremity, you know, and that's kind of what happens. And, the nature is perfect in this respect. And it was nature that taught us how to do this. And they, and the people that we learned it from will tell you, and you can see that the process and how it is self-engendering, right? So yeah, I mean, there's always this idea that we're gonna get the benefits without doing the hard work. That somehow we don't have to look at ourselves, we don't need to make the changes, or there's gonna be an easy way
I
around,
think
you
that's
know?
true for the first model, but for the second model that I shared, I don't. I think part of why it's so pernicious is because it's not even just that. I think an Iraq vet wanting to deal with PTSD and being dosed with psilocybin, um, they're not trying to avoid the hard work,
No, no, the
but
vet
the
isn't.
whole therapeutic modality, and it might even be helpful in ways, but it's trying to distill. It's like acupuncture being used in hospitals for pain management post-op. It's like, okay, cool. I'm glad it helps with that. But there's like a whole system here that's thousands of years old that's not even being considered in that application, right?
Well, and this is part of co-opting something who's gonna be in whose movie, right? And, the modern therapists, they don't wanna think that some shaman guy has some chops and can perform some healings that the modern guy can't do. But the thing is, the shaman has had to develop himself as the medicine, right? And this
Yeah.
idea that you just hand him the medicine and I'll be over here in my office filling out papers, like, that's not how it
Or
works,
even
right?
I'll sit with you. Even
Right. No,
that,
that
like,
doesn't work either.
yeah, for somebody that hasn't done 20 years of, um, lesson learning, that seems incredibly risky.
I'll play the cassette recorder of the Icaro that I never learned, and they don't understand that this is actually the human relationship that's doing the work here, and that the curandero or brujo has gone through a training that the modern therapist typically hasn't gone through. And but, that's where we saw the same thing out of chiropractors. They wanted to be able to study for 100 hours and then call themselves acupuncturists. And, even the acupuncture programs in the United States, still, they don't involve a 10-year, 15-year apprenticeship to a maestro person who, there's no money in that, right? So
Yeah.
so what we've seen is the pioneers are willing to pay the price, and the settlers are there for the easy way and the profit. I think that's a general rule.
I think we can attribute this to kind of, um, the misalignment of human intention as you
Yeah,
are,
yeah,
but I think it's really more about I think people who are playing around with using plant medicine to treat addiction and PTSD and things like that, many of them are trying to do a good thing. I don't think
I
they're
think so.
trying to
I
make a
agree.
quick buck necessarily. I mean, some are, I'm sure, but and they're even seeing some beneficial results, right?
No doubt.
Yeah. So
All the way back to Ram Dass, they saw positive results.
I missed the connection in terms of treatment for addiction.
Well, I think they were doing it with, criminals and convicts
Okay.
and looking, are they generating religious experiences? And they, back in the very some of the earliest research in there.
So how might we reconcile they seem to be getting some good results. I keep hearing that uh, iboga or ibogaine, the chemical compound that's active in iboga, with a one-time treatment, cures heroin addiction, and I've seen that. But I've seen it, where people go to Africa and go do a proper ceremony, or maybe
Right.
improper, I'm not sure, but, a full 3 days of being out of body and just like a total reset, I think. But now
Right.
they're extracting ibogaine. I don't know what they're mixing it with or not, but
Mhm.
micro dosing and they're getting some results.
Sure.
But I worry about, um, I guess, how sticky those results will be, what might be getting overlooked in the focus on those particular results. What do you think about that?
I think that they're bound to get some good results like people did when they were just completely freelancing. But I think that there are dangers for some people in that setting, and those are the cases where people really knowing what they're doing, helps. I think though also that the things that can be dealt with that way are probably limited if you don't have somebody who really knows what they're doing, and that the more the curandero knows what they're doing, the more difficult, intractable situations they'll be able to resolve. And a
Yeah,
lot of
so
them, if you're just freelancing, they just will be remain intractable.
so when you talk about dangers for folks, my association with that is some particularly negative material, can come up or even not come up, but in either case not be dealt with effectively, and that could
Sure.
leave the client, if you will, in a condition of greater confusion than they were in when they arrived.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep. I mean, also, I think because, one of the things in the mixture, when we say ayahuasca, it's not just ayahuasca, it's usually mixed with chacruna,
I think always by definition or some DMT, right? Because ayahuasca is the MAO inhibitor
Exactly.
that extends the experience that a DMT trip can have. So,
And
if you
there are
just take
different
DMT.
chacrunas that get in there,
Yeah.
so the mix can be quite different, and but that MAO inhibitor, it's going to affect anything that's messing with that monoamine oxidase base, right? So a lot of drugs that modern pharmaceuticals, they know that your body is going to recognize this is not a normal natural compound and it's going to start washing it out. So they're actually designed to time release, counting on the fact that your body will be washing it out, right? And that's what that monoamine oxidase does, is it washes out these things. So if you're taking that drug and that drug is time releasing and you start to inhibit the function of the monoamine oxidase, you that drug continues to build up in your system because now the mechanism to reduce it has been inhibited. And that so you aren't going to be ODing on the MAO inhibitor, you'll be ODing on this pharmaceutical that was counting on the washing out function of the MAO. And so that that's why the way to do it responsibly is you have to talk to the person beforehand. You have to know what their whole milieu is. I think kind of like a psychotherapist would, having been trained as a psychotherapist. That seems logical, right? So that's when you find out, what are they doing? Are they on something? Are they and you also find out how what I was taught was when you're learning how to do this, you don't just take a random person off the street and do a ceremony with them. You do ceremonies with people that your teachers have already worked with. So they already kind of know what's going on with that person. And they know you're not going to get jumped by something that you're in over your head, right? And and so then it's like a progressive curriculum. Like, you don't just start out doing ceremonies with 25 people. You do it with 1, then with 2, then with 3. It's like push-ups, right? So the broader your experience is, the less you can be thrown off your game. But I think we both have been in ceremonies when the maestro was thrown off his game. And it's nothing that anybody wants to make a habit out of, you know? And so, yeah, I said before that Wilhelm Reich said that whenever we get buggered up, our natural hardware, our infrastructure always lays deeper. And so whatever those buggering up things, whether it's a previous event or whatever, it's always sort of like on top of that impact. And so it's like whenever you're trying to recover from that, you always have that natural thing underneath that wants to express and heal itself. And so I think that in a lot of times people have spontaneous things happening because there's a reshuffling and then things sort out in a better balanced way. But the curandero is like a teacher and like a like moral support, but they're also there to debrief, right?
That was a huge part of the process for me. So I think my first, I don't know, 20, 30 ceremonies were with you, something like that.
Could have been, yeah.
Um, and I think every time was at your house the next day. Like, okay, here's what I got. Here are my,
Mhm, mhm,
here's what I experienced when you did this. Seemed like that was happening,
yeah,
of course, a lot of it was what did you have on the radar relating to me? What were you picking up? What do you think I'm
mhm,
stuck on? Right? Because I was searching pretty hard for how I was getting in my own way and I didn't have a handle on it. So
mhm, mhm.
debriefing was a huge component.
Big part. And I've had people, one guy went down, worked with some very good curanderos in South America. This is kind of an interesting story. I think I might have told you about this. Back in the day, years ago, there was a site, it's probably still there, called ayahuasca.com. And I used to show up there every once in a while just to kind of see what the state of the conversation was about all this stuff and how are people tending to think about it. And I got in conversation with a guy who was pretty intensely OCD. And he ended up, I just talked to him online, but then he ended up under his own motivation to go down to South America, and I think did a couple weeks with these guys at a resort place, and this was way before this became chic. This is now years ago that this happened. Um, and then when he came back, I said to him, "Why don't you stop over here in New Mexico and hang out for a few days, and we'll debrief you as you go back," you know. And so, and then he told me a story and the whole deal, and I kind of gave him just some guidelines about how to go forward into the future. And, you know, he had interesting story. He said, you know, before he started doing working with this, if the drawer in the kitchen that had the knives in it was open, no way he could sleep in his bedroom down the hall. And he told me that he knew he had this licked when he could sleep with an open box of razor blades on the dresser next to him in the bedroom. Now, this, of course, wouldn't be a thing to most people, but there was persistent thoughts. But anyway, so he basically had a whole big decoding and went back and changed his whole life and moved to another state and became you know, the person that he was supposed to be before this was in the way. And I talked to him for a while and I kind of saw how it was going. It's kind of like watching the bird fly off on the horizon. And about, I don't know, 10 years, 12 years, 15 years later, I get a phone call. And I'm not there to get it, so I get a message. And this was back in the days of message machines. Children, we used to have these machines on these phones that you couldn't carry in your pocket. And so when the phone was home, but you weren't, this machine would go, I'm not home. And you'd fill in your message. You get the idea, right? Well, so I get this message like on a Saturday that he had called on Friday. And it was like, "Hey, this is da da," and I don't even know if this is still your number, and but anyway, I really wanted to talk to you, and, so call me back if you get a chance. And this was on Friday, and so I called back on Saturday afternoon, and a voice answers, man's voice answers, and I say, "Hey, is he there?" And he says, "Well, no, this is his brother." And, "When did you talk with him?" I said, "Well, I didn't talk to him, you know, but I got this message just on Friday." "Oh, what time on Friday?" It's like, "Oh, looks like it was about 4 o'clock." "Oh, you were what did he say? That I guess had I talked to him, that would have been the last person that he would have talked to, because he tells me he died last night, and it wasn't by his own hand, it was by a a brain aneurysm or something, that just happens that you don't necessarily know was gonna happen, and none of them saw it coming. They were all kinda gobsmacked that it had just happened out of the blue, and it's like, of all the phone calls that I wished I had been there to receive, you know? Who knows what, but we only talked about things on the other side, right? About, the vine of the dead. And so whether he had a premonition or whether there, you know, who knows? But but so yeah, there's some content there, and it isn't always reasonable, but yet we do have, I'll sound Kantian here, by means of some faculty, we have some way to work in those extra sensory realms if we develop the capacity, and there are traditions of developing that capacity, you know. And I say, because you know, when I was in college, I did mushrooms and I did, you know, what we used to refer to as psychotourism, you know, from the ayahuasca tradition. We look at that and say it was psychotourism, uh, but I never would have learned or figured out what I learned from the maestros. And I say it's like you want to go out in the backyard and invent kung fu. Well, people been at this for 1,500 years, and you better burn the midnight oil if you think you're gonna discover and develop for yourself the things that a rooted lineage passed on through intergenerational knowledge. That's just not a thing, It would be like you just deciding you could design a car when you knew nothing about anything, right? So to say that, oh well, the primitives, they don't know anything, that's just that you don't know what they knew, and absence of proof is not proof of absence, right? So I think that, and of course this was McKenna's point with the archaic revival, that we really are kind of trying to bring back and integrate this distant chapter from our past. But I think if we get a chance to go through the story of Western philosophy like I want to, you'll see how we ended up here and how this is actually the drive for Native American knowledge and for Eastern knowledge, and to integrate that is actually the logical place where postmodernism should lead us to, if it wasn't just a it hadn't just been turned into a visceral knee-jerk reaction to everything.
Yeah.
Let's put it that way.
I think that's a good place to leave it for today. I think
Uh-huh.
maybe our next episode, or 2 or 3 will be on that topic of how might we integrate, these archaic means of consciousness
Mhm.
or modes of consciousness, with kind of our modern Western worldview, and why? Why would we,
And
and
why
how
do we
might
need
we?
them?
Yeah,
And why do we need them?
yeah,
And aren't we in fact seeing some of the signs that we need them?
good.
But that's a much longer conversation.
Yeah, good. Well, I look forward to it.
Yeah.
Thanks, Brian. I hope this was useful for people that have been wondering about what we mean when we mention ceremonies, and we'll keep coming back to it.
Yeah, and that, folks do, if you have questions or if there's things that we can address to help the picture be clearer, be sure to share those, leave those comments, and then get all your friends to subscribe too. We don't want to forget that.
Yeah,
You
good.
know the thing.